Hello and welcome back to Consumer Behavior. I'm so excited to start Module 2 with you. And today what we're going to be talking about is cross-cultural variations in consumer behavior. Now I know you're probably saying, Dr. Greer, what is a cross-cultural variation? And what does it have to do with consumer behavior? Don't worry, we're going to get into it. I'm going to try and explain it all to you. And I hope that last week, as you went through the framework here, the frame for this whole class, that you started seeing how this applies to some of the things that you've actually bought and purchased and seen in your life, because that's the whole point of this, is we want to start analyzing ourselves so we can then understand others. So today we're going to be focusing a lot on the external influences, and we're actually going to just start with culture. As we go through this course, we're going to start with the macro, and we're going to go down to more micro in each one of these. And so today, as we attempt to look at culture, we're going to find out some fascinating things, I'm hoping. Let's just jump into it. We're going to define culture, then we're going to describe some core values, then we're going to understand what kind of nonverbal things happen in between cultures, and then we'll talk about some just basic culture when it comes to the youth of the world. And then what role does global demographics play in marketing? I think that's a great question to figure out. And finally, we're going to talk about if we want to take a U.S. company and project it into another country, what are some things that we need to think about when we're doing that? So that's what we'll be talking about in this video. Should have a great time. And I'm going to just jump right into it. So marketing against cross-cultural boundaries is a difficult and challenging task. And this can be for many reasons. But as we look at entering into a different market or just communicating with other cultures, sometimes we can find that the marketing messaging is going to be different because the language, the demographic, the values, the nonverbal communications, they all act differently. And one of the ways I like to talk about this, and this is more of a subculture, I would say, so I don't want you to take this as literal, but this is more a subculture, not a massive culture. But even if we were to say we went to the South, and we could see the difference between how someone in Utah or someone in Louisiana might perceive something or take a look at that product or the way we describe the product. Another good one to do would be like California and Utah. There's different values that might be working between those two groups of people, and those are more of a subculture. In this context, what we're going to be talking about is more like countrywide. So if I'm from the US versus from Brazil, there might be a different way that we look or approach some of the different concepts happening here. So let's go ahead and jump in. There's a quick little video that I want to share with you. And it's about Oreo and how they have adapted globally to be the #1 cookie in the world. So let's just watch this. It's 3 or 4 minutes.
At 95 years old, Kraft's Oreo is the most popular cookie in the world, enjoyed in more than 100 countries throughout North and South America, Asia, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Australia. The Oreo cookie is a truly global product. It is sold in a consistent form, with very few exceptions, in all regions of the world.
The Oreo cookie is universally appealing. The unique flavor translates across borders, and the sandwich cookie with the fun of a cookie and cream makes Oreo a real fun eating experience.
Though the Oreo brand is popular around the world, adjustments to product, packaging, and promotion are sometimes necessary to match consumer tastes and expectations in each country.
In China, for example, we have a lightly sweetened version of Oreo, which has 27% less sugar, and that's really a response to consumers' desire and taste preferences for a less sweet product. In the case of Venezuela, milk chocolate biscuits are more appealing to consumers than the dark, intense cocoa that we're familiar with in the US and in some other markets. And so we have introduced and successfully launched a milk chocolate version of Oreo.
Packaging is a feature that can change greatly from market to market.
In the US, the 18-ounce size of Oreo is the predominant package form. And that's really because in the US, many consumers are more accustomed to shopping at large format stores. They have large pantries at home. They tend to shop, more weekly versus daily. In other countries, there's a variety of different formats, often smaller store formats, whether it's the kiosks in Brazil or the self-service convenience stores in China. or even these street vendors in Venezuela. And so in those countries, larger packages don't make as much sense. The stores don't have the space, and consumers don't have the pantry space in their homes.
The ways in which Oreos are promoted are also customized to meet each country's needs. In China, brands advertised on TV are seen as more credible and of a higher quality. So Kraft focuses a large percentage of their marketing on TV advertising in China. In a country like Venezuela, by contrast, outdoor advertising is more effective.
In Venezuela, we tend to use more outdoor marketing because the consumers are on the go and have busy lifestyles. We tend to find one of the best places to reach them is during their drive time. So we have oftentimes painted the sides of buildings or have enormous billboards that are very simple, high-impact visuals of an Oreo dunking into a glass of milk.
Marketing a product globally allows for huge growth potential within a brand, and understanding cultural parameters is the key to a successful campaign.
Oreo is an intrinsically universal product, but understanding and focusing on the cultural differences and local differences has really helped to make Oreo the #1 cookie in the world.
All right, so I didn't know Oreos were that big of a deal all around the world before I had seen that video, but it is interesting how they take a very, like I would just say, plain product and have to adapt it or market it differently in all the different markets in order to reach the right demographic. So when we look at globalization, one of the things I think we just need to realize is that there's a couple different ways to look at it. Typically, globalization from a US perspective has been like a one-way influence. It's that we have taken our companies, our products, and we've pushed them to other countries. Now that has been wanted by some of the other countries. Let's just be real for a minute. And some people have looked for U.S. products, and so that's great. But now we're seeing it more towards like a shift towards a mutual influence. So I would say if you had asked me 10 years ago if I was interested in going to see a soccer game, I probably would have been less interested, but I've been to plenty of LA Galaxy games. Now that I've moved here to Utah, I've been to a lot of Real Salt Lake games. Like, I enjoy soccer, but soccer hasn't typically been one of those things that America, the United States, has rallied around. Whereas now we see that even the NFL is starting to go international. That was once like more of a U.S. thing, and now the NFL is going out there. So we can see globalization being affected in many different ways. And there's 4 basic types of citizens: the global citizens, the people that just try to, work together; the global dreamers, the ones that want everything to be everywhere and make sure they have a unique perspective for each one of them. Then you have the anti-globals, which are the people that are like, nope, I'm going to keep my product here. I'm going to only serve this community. And then we have the global agnostics, which are people that really don't care whether or not it goes global. They just don't think about the rest of the world. So there's those 4 basic types. And so this leads us into this whole question of culture. And so I want to talk about the concept of culture here for a second. I like the book definition where it says, the culture is the complex whole that includes knowledge, belief, art, law, morals, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by humans as members of society. So there's a lot that goes in there, but that's the point of culture. There are so many different things happening in culture, and sometimes we can be a little unattentive to the cultural shifts that happen between countries and between peoples. And this can cause an issue when we're trying to do marketing. So when we take those cultural values and we stick them into the norms and the sanctions, which are the penalties that we can't do, we come out with a consumption pattern. Now, when we talk about this, there's lots of different ways, and we're going to go over a couple of them here, that these things happen. But let's just say, for instance, you were in class, and I'm not claiming any culture says this is okay, but I'm just going to tell you a norm versus a sanction. Let's say you're in class, and you feel a sneeze coming on. And you go, and you sneeze to the left all over one of your fellow classmates. Now, do you think they're going to say, bless you, I hope you're okay, thank you very much for that? Or are they going to punch you in the face? That might not be something that they want to have happen. So we just need to be aware of that and realize that there is a norm, that there's an appropriate behavior. If you're gonna cough, you're gonna cover your mouth. If you're going to sneeze, you might do it into your vampire sneeze kind of move. You're not gonna achoo and blow it out to everybody in the classroom, and there might be a penalty for doing so. And so And this can shift over time. So I think it's very important that we realize that cultures aren't static. They evolve and change over time. And so let's talk about some of the variations in cultural values. And there's a bunch of different values, and I'm not saying this is a comprehensive list, but I think this is a good starting place. So we have other-oriented values, which we're going to talk about all three of these here in depth. We have environment-oriented values, and then we have self-oriented values. So let's just go to that first one, other-oriented values. The U.S. is a very individualistic society, meaning like we like heroes. We like the rugged person that goes out and like conquers nature. Whereas if we went to an Asian country, they're probably a little bit more collective and they honor nature. They don't want to be in competition with it. They want to be more like in harmony with it. We think differently about youth and age. Some cultures revere the youth. Some cultures revere the elderly because they have wisdom. In China, it talks about in the book in China that the younger demographic is now starting to make a lot of the decisions because the older generations, even though they have wisdom, believe that the younger generations know more about what's happening currently. So they might, if they were going to buy a computer, they'd let the younger person decide. I remember, this is a long, long time ago, but when we were buying our first computer at our house, my mom and dad were spending like $2,000 when I was probably 10 or 11. And they wanted me to help them decide if it was a good computer because they were trying to foster that in me. They wanted to make sure that I would have access to technology. Well, we went down, and I remember it was with a floppy disk. I just ran one video game on the computer. I'm like, this is a good computer. We should get it. And looking back now, I find that very funny, but my parents were doing that. They actually spent a lot of money for my family at that point based on what I thought about this product. So it's pretty interesting. The other things that we could look at are extended versus limited family. Do we actually include our grandma, our grandpa? Like, is our family a lot bigger than our immediate family, or is it very limited? Is it just those people that are in our home, so to speak? Can the society or the culture value masculinity or femininity more? I would say that the U.S. lately has been shifting from a masculine society to more of a neutral society. And in fact, in some ways, I think you could say it's been going a little feminine. And now that might be different in India, let's just say, where masculinity is something that takes over and femininity has a different place in that role. And so those are just, we can look at those cultural values, and as marketers, when we're looking at it, we could say, okay, how do I use this? The competitive versus cooperative. Do we like a winner versus do we like a team? Do we want to be working together? So in some cultures where it can be seen as shaming the other people if you beat them, it might want to be more inclusive. Whereas I think in U.S. society for a long time, it's been like, hey, here's our Olympic athlete who can beat anybody. You know, that's kind of been a big thing for us. And then diversity versus uniformity. Like, is it better to be like everybody else, or is it better to be different? And cultures can vary on this. So I would just say, like, in the U.S., that's a bad example. I'm not even going to use that example. But yeah, I would just say that these are different pieces that when we look at others, like, how do we relate to someone else? What is the relationship that's going on? And then how do we use that to determine norms and sanctions? That's the big part. Like, what is acceptable and what's not? When we go to environment-oriented values, then we talk about cleanliness. Now, you know, I want to be respectful of everybody around the world right now, so I'm not trying to insult anybody. But in certain countries, they might use their hands when using the restroom. And in the U.S., if you looked at, you know, if you told someone, I'm using my hand to wipe my rear end, that might not be looked at very well. People might be like, what is happening right now? Maybe a bidet versus toilet paper. That's a different way of looking at cleanliness. So I think when we look at this, you know, the overall environment can mean something to us. Now, when we look at like a collective culture, they might purchase a vehicle, like a Lexus, to be included in a group, and it shows status by being in the group. In the U.S., we might buy a tricked out Lexus to be different than other people. And then also like tradition versus change. Like, are we able to, with a norm, have a change? Are we able to do something, or are we supposed to stick to a tradition? And then risk taking versus security. I think for a long time, the U.S. has been very focused on the immediate consumption and how it feels. Now, we all believe we should be saving, but we don't really want to put off that long-term gain or that long-term increase for a short-term hit. But a lot of people are doing that. And so in other countries, though, it might be all about security, not about risk-taking. Problem solving versus fatalistic. Like, are we trying to solve something, or are we like, oh, this is never going to get done? These are all part of it. And then going back to nature, like, are we here to conquer nature, or are we here to coexist with nature? These are all different things that we can look at from a marketing perspective and say, okay, where does this culture that we're going into, where do they line up on these things? Because that can inform us on how to have a good conversation, to know how to satisfy needs of that group. Finally, when we look at self-oriented values, are we talking about active or passive? Like, what are we doing? Are people expected to be physically active, or are they supposed to be like not doing things, not exercising very often? When we look at sensual gratification versus abstinence, when we see like, okay, is this a sexualized society, or is it one that is, we're not supposed to be doing anything like that? A very interesting part of the book was that Polaroid was a very big company, or is a very big company over in the Middle East, because they, when men would take pictures of their wives or their daughters, they didn't want another man developing that. So the mere fact that they could take the picture and it could be developed instantly, it meant that they had control over who saw their wives and their daughters. I had never even thought of that. I was like, oh, well, it's just a picture. So it's a very interesting dynamic to look at when we start saying, okay, how do we view ourselves in there? Do we want to be hardworking or more leisure? I think in the book it talks about Hong Kong has a 48-hour average work week. France has a 36-hour work week. Which one's in the middle? Where's the right piece there? And then that postponing of gratification versus immediate gratification that I talked about. Like, which one says more about you? Do you want to be flashy right now and show people that you're spending your money? Do you want to save and hold true to that? And finally, religious versus secular. I would say that the U.S. is more of a secular society at this point, but there's a lot of religious people. The question would be, like, how religious is the society at whole, and how much does that create a violation of norms, and where does our marketing play into that? So on this next slide, when we look at just something like sensual gratification, like if you were to show this in France, this is a billboard that was run in France, this probably would be okay in the US, but I think at this point we're almost getting, after Me Too, into this like sketchy world of should we be doing this? And I would say it's probably not as appropriate as when this book was first written in the US to promote or objectify men or women in ads. And so that's just something that we're starting to look at right now. So let's move on to cultural variations in nonverbal communications. Now, this is fascinating. And before we go into all 7 of these things, I just want to say I was watching a documentary just a few weeks ago, and it was talking about World War II. And the U.S. had conquered Japan, and the first U.S. soldiers were coming in to get everything ready to secure Japan and to do a bunch of stuff. So as they pull in, all these sailors jump in, get off their ship, they get into jeeps, and they drive into downtown Tokyo or whatever, and they're getting ready to go. And one of the things that was happening was the Japanese army had lined the streets every quarter mile or whatever with a soldier. And as they were coming into town, or driving into the where they were going, the soldiers were all facing away from the cars, and so they were at the road, but they were more facing away from the road. And the U.S. soldiers took this as a very big slight. They thought that they were being very rude. They thought that they were disrespecting them, and they thought that it was like a last, middle finger to the U.S. kind of thing. Well, if you pivot and see it from the Japanese viewpoint, part of this documentary was showing that the Japanese felt that they weren't worthy to look at their conquerors. And so they actually felt like it was paying the ultimate respect to turn around and not face them because they couldn't have that shame. fascinating to me to see that two groups of people with nonverbal communication gave off such different messages and neither one of them understood it at the time. So it actually heightened some tensions that were happening because the Japanese thought they had shown such deference and the U.S. thought that they had shown a lot of non-deference, I would say, that they were being petulant or something like that. And so, yeah, we can see that non-verbal communications can have dramatic effects and dramatic differences depending on where we are and how we look at things. So let's talk about these. The first one I want to talk about is time. Time means different things between cultures in two major ways. It's first the perspective and the interpretation, like how long is enough time, and then like what are you doing with my time. And there's a great example in the book that talks about an American CEO that flew to Japan in order to, I'm just realizing I don't mean to have two American-Japanese conversations here, but that's fine. We'll go with it. It's not intentional. And flew to Japan to sign a partnership contract with a Japanese company. And he meets with the CEO. Now, the U.S. person's thinking this is a sign of respect that they're coming in to see this big deal done. Well, the Japanese CEO has the American CEO come in and has the contract and sits down and starts reading it and is going through it page by page and asking questions and just clarifying some stuff. And the American CEO thought, oh, he's trying to renegotiate this deal, and got a little upset. Whereas the Japanese CEO literally was trying to show the time respect of this is a big deal and I want to pay tribute to you by giving you my time, honoring your document. Once again, so these are things that sometimes I think that when we get into cultural variations, we just need to be aware that there are differences, and maybe it would behoove us as marketers to investigate and see what is a norm about time when we go into this market. Let's move on to space. Overall use of meanings, scientists space vary widely among different cultures. So if I was to, here it goes again, I'm so sorry. I'm not trying to make this Japan versus the U.S. today, but my son just did get back from Tokyo, so we've been talking a lot about this at my house. If I was to go get into a train in Japan and get right up next to somebody, that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's normal. If you were to get on to tracks or something like that in Salt Lake and someone got right up in front of you and like was right here, how would it make you feel? Like you'd probably be like, whoa, back off. So we could see that in the culture, we have different proximity issues, I would say, on what is considered to be appropriate and what's considered not to be appropriate. I had a friend, really dear friend of mine, he would always come up and get really close when he talked to you and people would back off. And I had to talk to him several times and say, hey, that's not appropriate. You need to give people a little bit more space. You can see people actually start recoiling. And I was trying to help him develop himself in his career. And I said, one of the things you need to do is really the proximity with which you give people can really influence whether or not they are enjoying being near you, kind of thing. Then we can move on to symbols. Symbols, colors, animals, shapes, numbers, and music have varying meanings across culture. If you were to put up I think one of them that was in the book was Mont Blanc. On the tip of their pens, they have a little white snow-capped mountain. But in Arab countries, they thought it was like an homage to the Israeli star. So Mont Blanc had to educate and let everybody realize, no, this is more of a symbol towards where we make the pen, not that we're an Israeli-owned company. These are just different things. In Russia, if there was a thing, I think AT&T talked about, they did a thumbs up, but it was the hand was facing. And whenever you show someone the palm, I guess it's a disrespectful thing in Russia versus this. So all they had to do was flip the thumbs up around, and it was like, okay, that's fine. And then people weren't upset by it. So there's a lot of different symbols. I think that there are some really cool examples in the book here in table 2-3 where the white is the symbol for mourning or death in the Far East, but it means purity in the United States. Red is unlucky or negative in Chad, Nigeria, and Germany, but it's positive in Denmark, Romania, and Argentina. Yellow flowers are a sign of death in Mexico, but infidelity in France. The number 7 is an unlucky number in Ghana, Kenya, Singapore, but it's lucky in Morocco, India, Czechoslovakia, Nicaragua, and the United States. In owl, it means wisdom in the United States, but bad luck in India. So there's these different things that we can look at and say, wow, those symbols or numbers or colors, they can vary dramatically between this. In fact, as I was going through this chapter, one of the things I saw was that purple is associated with death in many Latin American countries, and I work at doTERRA. And I'm like, okay, well, our main corporate color is that, is purple. So maybe I need to go talk to those international teams and see if they've changed it. I don't know. I'm going to have to follow up with them. But I'll probably have a meeting in this room with somebody next week to see, have we thought about this? Is this something that might be helping or hurting us down in that country? Moving on, going into relationships. So how quickly and easily do cultures form relationships and make friends? I always like to say, like, if you were unfriended on Facebook, is it a slight or is it okay? If someone stops following you on Instagram, is it okay? Or are you like, okay, why didn't you like my picture? Like there's all these different pieces. So Americans tend to like quickly form these relationships. The Chinese have this, I think it's guanxi is how you say that. And there's a lot of different pieces that go into that. You can read about that in the book, but it's very complex and it's characterized. Now, there's a fight to push away from that in China and try to make it a little more, I would say, Americanized or Western in their relationships. But relationships have a big deal. I think sometimes when we think about who's our best friend, what does that mean, best friend? And will we say the same person to everybody? Of course, my best friend's my wife. You can't trick me up on that. But if you were to ask me who's my best friend that's not my wife, okay, then I have several people that I really enjoy being with. And I'd say, okay, family or non-family? I want to maybe define what you're asking with that relationship. Because I have some brother-in-laws that I just love. Or maybe if it's not about family, I'd go to some people I've worked with. Those are different pieces. So I think it's just always important that we think about what is developing a relationship with this person in this other culture. Another one's agreements. Is a handshake better than a lawsuit? In some countries, that's true. Some countries, they don't do it. How do they settle disagreements? In the U.S., we're a pretty litigious society. In other countries, it might be actually shameful if you didn't live up to your agreement. So someone might really, you don't even have to invoke the courts. But we just need to look at what does it mean to have an agreement with a person there. And also things, when we look at things, we're like, okay, what does it mean if I was to give you a ring? Is there a symbolic gesture in giving someone a ring in the United States? If I was to give you a fruitcake, what's the symbolism behind that? Or if I was just to give you a gift, does that mean something? In the U.S., it's different than a different country. So we need to realize that what if we gave someone an insult gift or a really meaningful gift? Like what if you thought you were getting engaged if someone gave you a ring? There's different meanings based on the actual item itself. And I think that's a very important thing to be thinking about when we're looking at consumer behavior and how we can influence that for marketing. Finally, let's talk about etiquette. So what's a normal behavior that's considered proper or rude or obnoxious? It might be acceptable. I would say Simon Cowell is a great example of, is he great or is he horrible? Gordon Ramsay, these UK judges, so to speak, that come to the US. People love them or hate them, and it's because their etiquette. They think they might be rude or obnoxious, but some people are like, finally, someone's talking directly. Like, there's just what's the tone or pitch? How fast can someone talk? It all depends on the culture, and so we might want to figure out what is appropriate. I had someone I'm mentoring at work the other day, and I was telling them, you're talking too quietly in meetings where we're having big conversations. You need to get louder. And I said, it's not because you're trying to dominate, it's because you're trying to come off as confident at work. And so, that was an etiquette thing. I'm trying to educate them on that etiquette in corporate America. And now I know people, myself probably included, I get way too loud in meetings and I might, be way over the top, but I'm just passionate like that. And I've tried to work on bringing that back a little bit because the etiquette might not be to be that flamboyant, I would say, in a corporate meeting. So those are just different ways to look at the different etiquettes. Moving on to youth, I think that one of the concepts is that the youth movement is pretty big and diverse around the world, but homogenized at the same time, meaning like a lot of times youth are looking to the same things to push their style, their culture, what they want to do. I think just to keep it on an Apple topic, the iPhone is like the number one like desired phone by youth around the world in virtually every country. Now, I would say why? Because they have good taste. No, I'm just kidding. Why is that? What is it about the iPhone that pushes people towards it? What is it about Disney? I think Disney has a pretty far-reaching influence on global youth culture. When they have all their shows available in different countries and they're trying to, well, they're not trying, but they are pushing this is the way the world works. So I think that a lot of times what we need to do is just realize that youth have a large part to play in the evolution of culture, and it depends on how much access they have to all the other youth, which is pretty universal. Demographics, and so when we look at what is the difference between a highly densely populated society like New York, or if we come to more rural Pleasant Grove, Utah, let's just say. I think that if you've ever been to New York, it's mind-blowing. It's amazing to see how many people fit into such a small area. Coming from California, the difference between San Diego and LA was baffling. It was just, wow. I mean, San Diego is pretty populated. There's more people in the county of San Diego than in the entire state of Utah. And so it's a pretty populated area, but you go to LA and San Diego feels quaint. So, you get on an LA freeway and you're like, I did not realize that there could be this much traffic. I often think, I laugh when we go through Lehigh and all the construction going on right now because it feels like the traffic is just horrible, but it's nothing compared to a daily occurrence in California, and they have massive freeways. It's just, there's so many cars and so much. So that can just have a different value placed on it with the density that's happening. They might, in California, I feel like coming from California, when a light would turn green, everybody would try to move at the same time. Here in Utah, it's very different to me. It's fascinating because light goes green, the first person goes, then the second person decides to go, the third person decides to go, and the light turns yellow by the fourth person. The fifth person drives through the red light, which would never happen, I don't think, in California without an accident. And then the sixth person comes up and stops. And it's just like, wow, you could have gotten 12 people through if you all started moving at the same time. But it's just a weird, collective versus individualistic look on traffic. And that's anecdotal from my experience, but it's been something I've noticed a lot of. So one of the things to look at when going into different demographics is the purchasing power parity and this PPP. So what this is if you were to combine a basket of goods together and then look at how much purchasing power different countries have. Like over here, if we were to look at the per capita income, now this is based on the U.S., so the per capita income is 100% for the U.S., and then it varies after you go to inflation rates and everything for the other countries. There's a lot of explanation goes in here. But we can see that, if the per capita income was $41,000 U.S. and Brazil's was $8,596, we could buy 5 times as much stuff in the U.S. per capita, per person, than we could in Brazil. This is really important because we need to maybe modify what we're actually trying to sell and how much we're trying to sell it for. We want to make sure that we can hit the price points that we need to in order to be successful. So one of the big questions is there money in the market? Is this something that if we took to that market, we can actually make some money with? And that's a good question to ask. It doesn't mean it's a negative thing. It means that we need to know that our business, as it expands, is this an appropriate place with our business model to take this? So, a couple last things here. Considerations, things to think about when moving into a foreign market. With respect to culture, do they want to be integrated with the U.S. culture, or do they want to be separated? Can what needs can this product fill in this culture, and it might be different. Like in the Oreos piece, I think they said Argentina likes milk chocolate over dark chocolate, so they had to, alter the flavor of the cookie. That was something that's like very fascinating to me. It's like, okay, number three, I always ask this: does the market have money? Can enough people afford to actually take part on this? What values are relevant to the purchase and the use of the product? Like, are we displaying something that's going to offend people, or do we need to let them know that this is a together piece, a family piece? What are the distribution, political, legal structures for the product? Are there different legalities that we can't maybe even assume, or maybe there's a political pressure that we don't know what's happening? I would say that a great example of that was Apple was struggling in China over the last year, and a lot of people think it was because of the trade war that was going on. So a lot of people were buying Huawei phones in China, trying to show support for China versus Apple. Now we've fixed that as the two countries are starting to trade better together again, and Apple sales are going up in China. It's like, okay, that's a very fascinating cultural piece there. And how are we talking about the product? Is it on TV? Is it the billboard in Venezuela with Oreos? And then what are the ethical implications of marketing this product in the country? Like if we were to put a scantily clad female eating a cheeseburger for Carl's Jr. or something like that in Saudi Arabia, would that work or not work? I don't think that would work very well. In fact, I don't think that worked very well in the US. I think that a lot of people stopped eating at Carl's Jr. because they were so offended by those ads. So those are just kind of little pieces to look at. And I think it's great to look at on page 67 in the book, there's a consumer insight 2-1, and it talks about Unilever. And Unilever is a company that does laundry supplies. And so one of the interesting stats was, when this book was written at least, 7 million people every half an hour wash their clothes around the world using a Unilever product. And 6 million of those people do it by hand. And I was like, what? Who's washing their laundry by hand? And they want to use a bar of soap for their laundry, not a powder. And I was like, powder? Like, I don't even use powder anymore. I'm on liquid or on a Tide Pod. There's all these different things. And so we can look at it and say, okay, my wife would probably tell you that she doesn't think clothes will get as clean unless we use a liquid laundry detergent. Now, is that true? I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that powdered laundry detergent or bars of soap laundry detergent are better. But it does use a lot of water. And we have a high efficiency washer at our house. And even then, it's like, okay, how many rinse cycles does it have to go through? What does this mean for cleanliness of the clothing? There are a lot of different pieces to ask about those kinds of things. And so we could look at that and say, okay, Unilever coming to the US, if they were to start advertising, hey, here's bars of laundry soap that you can hand wash your clothes with. Would that work in the US? Probably not. I'd be like, where do I live right now? And it's because our culture has told us that we have machines do that. But back in the 50s, people did it by hand still. And so, culture changes and norms alter, and that's just a big piece of what we're talking about here. The final little thing, I thought this was a good little example, was this Dunkin' Donuts. Now, if we just look at the symbolism on here. Now, Dunkin' Donuts in the background, you can see is the same beautiful, let me just see if I can show you here. Yeah, here it goes. That's the same logo. We have a stop smoking thing back here. And then we come down to the rabbit. And when we look at the rabbit, there's a bunch of little pieces here I just want to point out. First off, it's a rabbit, and we're in China. I think that means lucky. I'm culturally ignorant on this. But notice that the hand gesture is together. Like, we're here together. It might be a sign of respect. Notice that there's a little smiley face down below. And then there's little sparkles everywhere, and there's gold on this. I think all of those have symbolic gestures towards what Dunkin' Donuts is trying to say to the Chinese market. Now, if this rabbit had droopy ears, I think it would be different than raised ears. These are all little pieces that we have to look at, and we do as marketing individuals as we're trying to affect consumer behavior. So there's a lot of customized things happening here, a lot of standard things happening here. They don't have very many donuts in that window. So, it looks like they might be doing well with what they're trying to market here. But that's chapter 2. And I hope we've learned a little bit about cross-cultural variations. You have a couple things to do this week. and I'm really excited to get into those discussions with you. So I hope you've learned something, and I will talk to you next week. Thanks.